2-hour edition of DD India News Hour live from New Delhi. It's just after 9 p.m. in New Delhi, 5:30 in the evening in the Italian city of Fasano that's hosting this year's G7 summit, and 10:30 in the morning in the US city of Austin, where Tesla investors have approved a $56 billion pay package for the company's founder Elon Musk. All that and much more coming up over the next couple of hours. But first, the headlines. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds bilateral talks with the presidents of France and Ukraine, and Britain's Prime Minister on the sidelines of the G7 Outreach Summit in Italy. Migration and China top G7 agenda on the concluding day of talks in Italy. Pope Francis delivers a historic address on artificial intelligence, becomes the first head of the Catholic Church to join a G7 summit. Russia's President Vladimir Putin sets out conditions for peace talks with Ukraine, says Moscow will agree to a ceasefire if Ukraine pulls out its troops from 4 regions. And India brings back bodies of 45 workers from Kuwait. An electrical short circuit had caused a fire in a building housing foreigners on Wednesday. India's Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi is participating in a G7 outreach session on artificial intelligence, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean. The outreach session provides an opportunity to bring greater synergy between the outcomes of the G20 summit held under India's presidency and the G7 summit, and deliberate on issues which are crucial for the global south. France's President Emmanuel Macron, in his address, praised Prime Minister Modi's initiative on artificial intelligence and digital public infrastructure. The G20 summit was successfully conducted in New Delhi in September 2023. Pope Francis joined on Friday the outreach session of the G7 Leaders Summit in Borgo Xania in the southern Italian region of Puglia to lead discussions on artificial intelligence. It's the first time in history that a pontiff has taken part in a meeting of the Group of 7 democracies. The group comprises Britain, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, the United States and the European Union. Pope Francis was warmly embraced by a fellow Argentinian President Javier Milei and kissed by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He also received a hug from Jordan's King Abdullah and had a long whispered conversation with US President Joe Biden. Besides, he also met India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. The G7 outreach session on artificial intelligence was also attended by Pope Francis. The Pope said that humans must not lose control of artificial intelligence.
We need to guarantee and protect a space for meaningful human control over the process of choosing artificial intelligence programs. Human dignity itself depends on it. Precisely on this issue, let me insist. In a drama such as armed conflicts, it is urgent to rethink the development and use of devices such as so-called lethal autonomous weapons in order to ban their use, starting already with a proactive and concrete effort to introduce more and more meaningful human control. No machine should ever choose whether to take the life of a human being.
Earlier, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed the Pope at the G7 summit. Now, a Pope is making an appearance at a G7 summit for the first time ever. G7 leaders and Pope Francis discussed about how to govern artificial intelligence and harness it for growth. Artificial intelligence has become a major geopolitical talking point among G7 leaders ever since the so-called generative AI captured the public's imagination in late 2022. And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a bilateral meeting with France's President Emmanuel Macron on the margins of the G7 summit in Italy. The two leaders reviewed India-France bilateral relations, focusing on the Horizon 2047 roadmap and the Indo-Pacific roadmap as well. Both leaders agreed to expand cooperation in the realm of AI, critical and emerging technologies, energy and sports. The two leaders will also work closely in context of the forthcoming AI Summit and the United Nations Oceans Conference, both to be hosted in France in 2025. The two also exchanged views on key global and regional issues, emphasizing on a strong and trusted strategic partnership. The Prime Minister also extended his best wishes to President Macron for the forthcoming Paris Olympics and the Paralympic Games. Prime Minister Modi also met his British counterpart Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of the summit. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak congratulated PM Modi on his historic third consecutive term. The two leaders reaffirmed the shared commitment of both countries to further strengthening their bilateral ties. The two discussed about the implementation of Roadmap 2030 and expressed happiness on the progress in all areas of their comprehensive strategic partnership. They also expressed satisfaction with the progress made in the free trade agreement negotiations between the two countries. The two leaders also discussed about regional and multilateral matters of mutual interest. The Indian Prime Minister also held talks with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Both leaders had a productive meeting in which they discussed about ways to strengthen bilateral relations. They also exchanged views on the situation in Ukraine and the upcoming summit on peace being hosted by Switzerland. The Prime Minister conveyed that India continues to encourage peaceful resolution of the conflict through dialogue and diplomacy, and reiterated that India would continue to do everything within its means to support a peaceful resolution. Now, after a first day dominated by Ukraine, US President Joe Biden and the leaders of Japan, Italy, France, Germany, Canada and the UK opened the second day of the G7 summit in Italy with talks on migration. The talks also focused on the Indo-Pacific, including fair trade with China, the world's second largest economy.
Migration, China and artificial intelligence topped the agenda of the concluding day of discussions at the G7 summit in Italy. The group of 7 nations vowed on Friday to tackle what they called unfair business practices by China that were undermining their workers and industries, according to a draft statement on the final day of the annual summit. The G7 also warned of action against Chinese financial institutions that helped Russia obtain weaponry for its war against Ukraine. G7 leaders gathered for a roundtable on migration, with Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni pushing Europe to help her curb the illegal flows from Africa. The summit saw a historic appearance by Pope Francis to discuss artificial intelligence. The Pope was joined by heads of state and government, including India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. On the margins of the summit, the presidents of the US and Ukraine signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement that aims to bolster Ukraine's defenses. The pact commits future US governments to supporting Ukraine by helping it develop its outdated armed forces.
President Zelensky and I have just now signed that agreement between the United States and Ukraine. Our goal is to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capabilities for the long term. The United States is going to help ensure that Ukraine can do both, not by sending American troops to fight in Ukraine, but by providing weapons and ammunition, expanding intelligence sharing, continuing to train brave Ukrainian troops at bases in Europe and the United States, enhancing interoperability between our militaries in line with NATO standards, investing in Ukraine's defense industrial base, so in time, they can supply their own weapons and munitions.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called the agreement historic. He said it is a bridge towards Ukraine's eventual NATO membership.
Today is a truly historic day, and we have signed the strongest agreement between Ukraine and the US since our independence. And this is something that will not only provide security, but also new good jobs for Ukrainians and Americans. The issue of NATO is covered through the text of the agreement. It states that America supports Ukraine's future membership in NATO and recognizes that our security agreement is a bridge to Ukraine's membership in NATO.
Canada will now host the next G7 summit in 2025. Bureau Report, DD India.
And joining me from Italy for more on the G7 Outreach Summit is my colleague Giles Gibson. Giles, good to see you back on the broadcast. If I can start by asking about the joint statement, when is it likely and what to expect from the text of that joint statement as well?
Ramesh, it's always a little bit hard to get a sense of exactly when the joint statement is going to land at the end of these meetings, but we are expecting it in the next few hours at the end of day 2 rather than on day 3 of the summit when Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, is going to be holding a press conference, and that's largely because the US President Joe Biden is departing Italy at the end of day 2 rather than staying on for the 3rd day of this summit. So that's when we're expecting to get the final statement. We have had some draft statements being leaked to the press over the last few hours or so with some pretty tough language on China, I have to say, in terms of the G7's concerns about what they describe as Chinese industrial overcapacity. So in the next few hours, we should get the final statement. And of course, we already know after day 1 that the leaders have agreed that political deal in terms of giving that $50 billion loan to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets in the West.
Since you refer to China, Giles, let's dwell a bit more at some length on this issue, besides migration, of course. If I can quote Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, as saying in a social media post, she has spoken about, as you mentioned, overcapacity of China being a global concern, and she says they will coordinate the responses going forward. She also touched upon China's unfair trade practices. What's the EU or G7 position on China on some of these issues, Giles?
Well, Ramesh, it's really interesting that you use that phrase from Ursula von der Leyen, unfair trade practices, because that exact language we believe is going to be in the final statement from the G7. So this is the draft statement that we've had leaked out. This is not yet final. Of course, the wording could change in the coming hours, but we believe that the G7 are first going to insist that they're not trying to stymie China's economic growth, that they are not trying to sort of push China to the sidelines, but they are also going to say, we believe, that they will continue to take actions to protect our businesses from unfair practices and to level the playing field. The context going into this summit being that both Washington and Brussels issued new tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles just before this summit took place.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We'll have to leave it at that, Giles. Thank you. Giles Gibson reporting there on the G7 summit deliberations from Italy. And joining me now is another of my colleagues, Amritpal Singh, who is also in Italy covering that summit for our viewers. Amrit, as we've been talking here on our broadcast, it's Prime Minister Modi's first overseas visit in his 3rd term. How's it coming along? Tell us about the top lines of the summit, and then we'll focus on the specifics.
Well, the Prime Minister's day began with bilateral meetings. He held bilateral meetings, as you already mentioned, with the French President. He met the British Prime Minister, and he met the Ukrainian President, where different issues related to related to bilateral ties were discussed individually with these leaders. With the Ukrainian President, the Ukrainian President briefed him about the situation in Ukraine, and also the Indian Prime Minister suggested to him that the way forward should be through dialogue and diplomacy and not war. That's a consistent position that India has been maintaining since the conflict began, both to the Russians and to the Ukrainians. And he wished him luck for the Ukrainian peace conference also, which takes place, which starts and begins tomorrow in Switzerland. The Prime Minister is still right now in the outreach session. We really don't have much idea, because it's a closed session, as to what the Prime Minister has said. We'll get to know in a little while, but we do know that the French President Emmanuel Macron praised Prime Minister's initiatives both on the digital public infrastructure and using AI as the G20 chair. On the same hand, the American President Joe Biden was all praise for Brazil, Argentina, and India, and called them critical mineral partners. So what really transpired once the session finishes, because it's a closed-door session, we'll get to know more about that. There are a few more bilaterals lined up, Ramesh, with the German Chancellor, with the Japanese Prime Minister, and a few other leaders.
Right, so as Amrit Pal is reporting there, Prime Minister Modi has already met with President Macron, Prime Minister Sunak, and President Zelensky of Ukraine. And as he mentions there, he will be holding bilateral talks with the leaders of Germany, Italy, and Japan as well going forward. But coming back to the bilaterals, Amrit, could you also talk a bit more about what the two leaders discussed, be it the meeting with France or, for that matter, Ukraine and the UK? We believe that India has a special strategic partnership with France and the UK, including the FTA negotiations that are currently on.
That's right. The relationship, the bilateral relationship was reviewed. It came into discussion, though they were 20-minute long short meetings or half-hour short meetings. But, these were the areas where AI was discussed, blue economy was discussed. I'm talking with Rishi Sunak. Digital public infrastructure was discussed. The FTA, the ongoing negotiations on FTA were touched upon. Though the two leaders generally, have discussions on them, but as you know, you've been covering foreign affairs for a very long time. Detailed discussions on it generally are done once delegation level talks happen. These are one-on-one meetings, but it does give the cue to the officials to further boost the areas on which the principals bring up in their discussion and review meetings. So it is to say, lend a certain amount of continuity on that. There were similar discussions with the French president on issues that matter between nuclear cooperation, science and technology, defense cooperation. He also wished him luck for the Paris Olympics, which France is scheduled to hold. A range of issues. With the Ukrainian president, I already told you that, the Prime Minister listened to the Ukrainian president on about the situation in Ukraine currently, and, wished him luck for the peace conference, and reiterated India's position that, the avenue of dialogue and diplomacy should be explored further, rather than bringing the conflict to an end through military means. Ramesh?
Amrit, while we are still waiting for the actual text of the Indian Prime Minister's intervention in that session at the margins of the G7 outreach summit in Italy, is there a fair understanding now that from India's perspective, there are four key issues that are center stage? 1, energy; 2, the Mediterranean; 3, Africa; and 4, the wider Indo-Pacific region. And in that context, when you talk about connectivity and energy, Amrit, Italy plays a crucial role in the proposed India-West Asia-Europe economic corridor that passes from India via the Gulf and African countries to Europe and beyond. what can we expect on some of these issues on the margins of the G7 summit as well?
Well, the Prime Minister is expected to stress upon, this corridor and how it is important for, this corridor as an alternative to the existing global supply chain routes. Because the energy security is a very, very important a component of maintaining both economic stability and political stability, especially in the vulnerable parts of the world. So any kind of disruptions or any kind of conflict should not be there. There should be multiple routes of energy flow or multiple distribution chains or supply chains. So this initiative is essentially a part of that, and it benefits not only one particular country or two particular countries that it passes through, but the whole world. So the flow of energy, for example, when the conflict broke, the Ukraine-Russia conflict broke out, Europe bore the brunt of it very much. Though it's buying American oil and American energy, and well, some say Russian energy also routed via other routes. But to see that a certain amount of economic stability, a certain amount of political stability is maintained, the Prime Minister is expected to press upon and lay trust on this, that this has to, what was agreed upon at the G20 must be carried forward and implemented, and
right.
It should not become a non-starter, Ramesh.
All right, that's all we have time for. I will have to leave it at that. Amrit, thank you. Appreciate it. That was Amrit Pal Singh reporting on the G7 deliberations from Italy. Now, India is among the countries invited to the G7 Outreach Summit in Italy. It's the 5th consecutive time India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is taking part in a G7 Outreach Summit, and the 11th time India has been invited to it.
G7 is a group of countries with advanced economies. India, with a GDP of $3.94 trillion, boasts of an economy larger than 4 G7 members, Canada, France, Italy and the UK, and is one of the fastest growing economies worldwide. New Delhi emerged as the 5th largest economy, that is even larger than the G7 host nation, Italy. And this highlights its rising global stature. Initially, the focus of G7 used to be on economy, as the leaders of the most powerful economies used to meet. But now things have changed. This is India's 11th and Prime Minister Modi's 5th consecutive participation at the G7 summit. The connection between Prime Minister Modi and G7 started in 2020 when he was invited to the US. But the summit got cancelled due to the pandemic. Later on, he marked his presence at the G7 summit in the years 2021, 2022 and 2023, representing India as a special guest. India plays a crucial role in the Indo-Pacific region. India's strategic partnerships with multiple G7 countries underscores its significance. Its improving relations with Italy, coupled with its long-standing ties with Russia and numerous African nations, positions India as a key player in discussions on economic security, geopolitical stability and development. India's participation in the G7 summit not only underscores its expanding influence, but also its crucial role in fostering global cooperation and sustainable development. As the world navigates through complex challenges, India's leadership is essential in driving positive change. Bureau Report, DD India.
And moving on, Russia's President Vladimir Putin on Friday set out conditions for starting peace talks with Ukraine. On the eve of a peace conference in Switzerland to which Russia has not been invited, Putin said that Russia would be ready for a ceasefire talks if Ukraine withdraws its troops from 4 Ukrainian regions claimed by Moscow, and if Ukraine gave up its plans to join NATO.
The conditions are very simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, and I draw your attention from the entire territory of these regions, within the administrative borders that existed at the time of their entry into Ukraine. As soon as Kiev declares that it is ready for such a decision and begins the actual withdrawal of troops from these regions, as well as officially notifies that they abandon plans to join NATO, an order to cease fire and begin negotiations will immediately follow from our side, literally at the same minute.
Meanwhile, a Ukrainian presidential aide dismissed the peace proposal put forward by President Vladimir Putin, saying it was not a serious attempt to agree on peace and had no relevance to any negotiations. The Ukrainian presidential aide also said there was no possibility of finding a compromise between Putin's statement and Ukraine's conditions for ending the war launched by Russia. And joining me from Moscow for more on this developing story is my colleague Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, what more can you tell us about Putin's offer for talks, provided, as we are given to understand, Ukraine meets all of his preconditions?
President actually lays out the conditions for starting those negotiations. Until now, Moscow has insisted that the realities on the ground have to be taken into account. Now, the Russian president says that the Ukrainian side has to withdraw its troops from the entire territory of the four regions, which Moscow now claims as its own: Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, as well as the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Now, President Vladimir Putin also insisted that Ukraine should drop its NATO aspirations, become a non-nuclear and non-state and non-bloc country, which will be neutral. He also has insisted that Ukraine has to demilitarize and to denazify. In this situation, he said Moscow will immediately order a ceasefire once Ukrainian troops start to pull out, and this will be serving as the prerequisite for finding a lasting solution to the conflict in Ukraine instead of just freezing the conflict. He also has stressed that this process will have to go hand in hand with the removal of anti-Russian sanctions, and noted that any agreement will have to be taken in the form of a legally binding international document. Obviously, on the Ukrainian side, what we have heard was the dismissal of this proposal. We also have heard Ukraine saying that it is not a peace proposal, rather an ultimatum. Instead, the Kremlin insists it is a real chance to cease fire and find a negotiated solution.
Also, Dasha, how might the Kremlin be viewing the G7 deliberations in Italy and the NATO defense ministers' talks in Brussels?
Well, speaking about the possibility of the use of the profit from Russia's frozen assets, we've heard Moscow saying it is a theft which undermines the trust in the international financial system, which has already been undermined by the financial crisis. Moscow insists that the investors internationally will only be withdrawing their assets from the Western countries, seeing this type of behavior. In the meantime, Moscow promises a retaliation. Moscow says the retaliatory measures that are being now worked out in Russia will be extremely painful, but will still serve the best interests of Russia. Speaking about the possibility of more foreign aid to Ukraine in terms of the military equipment, Russia insists again that the Western countries are not interested in finding a negotiated solution, and instead they are only encouraging longer fighting in Ukraine by providing more weapons.
Dasha, thank you very much. That was Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Switzerland on Friday said that 100 delegations have confirmed they will attend the Ukraine summit, which will be held on the 15th and 16th of June near the Swiss city of Lucerne. 92 countries and 8 organizations will join Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky at the summit to explore ways of ending the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. India would also be attending the summit. Still to come on DD India News Hour. An expert take on India's latest export data, which is estimated to grow at 10.25%. India's $1 million aid reaches Papua New Guinea as the country struggles to recover from a devastating landslide. And heat wave returns to northern India even as the monsoon advances.
We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts, we demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. In some more news for you now, amid praises from global agencies, India has registered a rise in exports. The next report tells you more.
India's economy continues to rise. The latest metric reaffirming this is the increase in exports. According to data released by the country's Ministry of Commerce and Industry, India's total exports are estimated to grow at 10.25% in May 2024. Valued at $73.12 billion, the cumulative value of exports during April to May 2024 period rose by over 5%. India's merchandise exports grew by 9.1% at over $38.13 billion in May 2024. Major drivers of merchandise exports in May 2024 include petroleum products, engineering goods, electronics and pharmaceuticals. Electronic goods export rose by over 22%. Petroleum product export increased by 15.7%. Drugs and pharmaceuticals export increased by 10.45%, while non-petroleum, non-gems and jewelry exports rose by over 8%. Analysts credit rebound in global trade, government incentives for manufacturing for the rise in exports. According to global ratings agency Moody's, India will remain the fastest growing economy in Asia Pacific in 2024. The agency said that India will sustain its growth momentum owing to policy continuity under the Modi 3.0 government and a continued focus on infrastructure development and also the encouragement of private sector investment. Bureau Report, DD India.
Now, India is likely to attract millions of dollars in investments and generate 200,000 jobs in the next couple of years because of production-linked incentive schemes announced under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. According to a report, the investments will generate new jobs in sectors such as semiconductor, solar module and pharmaceutical intermediary. The rating agency ICRA expects select sectors, including metal, to face a stronger uplift in capital expenditure. The PLI schemes focus on enhancing manufacturing capabilities and boosting exports. And joining me is Ms. Deepshika Sikarwar. She's joining us from Delhi. She's a senior editor at the Economic Times newspaper. Ms. Sikarwar, welcome to DD India News Hub. Now, first up, how do you interpret the data? Why don't you unpack it for our viewers?
Thank you, Ramesh. If you look at the export data, we've seen demand sort of coming back in our key markets, which was Europe and US, and which is what we're seeing in the numbers, which augurs really well for India's export sector, because though the geopolitical conflicts, they are there, but they are sort of not impacting the trade as they were earlier. And the rise in exports, if you see the main indicators, the engineering goods, electronics, drugs, pharmaceuticals, and we've seen a lot of positive movement even in the textile sector, which was mentioned by the Commerce Secretary in his press conference. So definitely the change which is being seen in the developed markets, which are our key markets for our export sector, is definitely having an impact, and it's reflecting in the numbers. Also, if you see, a number of initiatives were taken by the government over past few months. The embassies, the various embassies in countries, they were asked to reach out, identify products which Indian exporters could sell, or the one district, one product scheme that was sort of unveiled. So there was a lot of emphasis on, enhancing exports in other countries as well. So I think all these measures have also had their impact.
And talking about what factors you attribute these data to in terms of policy prescription, looking ahead to Modi 3.0, do you expect continuity and more focused approach on some of these issues that you have flagged?
Definitely. I think if you see, this was one of the apprehensions of the markets as well, and also the experts. But with the new government taking charge and the new coalition government taking charge, people are confident that the policy continuity would be there. And also, if you see, there is a lot of emphasis in the government formation as well. There's a lot of emphasis on stability and continuity. So you have the same ministers who've been given charge, because a lot of initiatives that were taken or that were halfway can be pushed through. So definitely there'll be emphasis on export sector because export sector is a large sector, large employment generator. Employment generation remains a key focus for the government. Also, we are trying to, as a country, attract a lot of investment in the manufacturing. So the idea is not just produce for the country, but also for the entire world. Become a supplier of the world, and which is what India is trying to do. So going forward, the policy, there would be more policy interventions coming in for export sector as well, which are expected in the budget. Going forward, in terms of a lot of facilitation and easing of procedures.
Sikarwar, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. In some other news now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to be re-elected for a second term on Friday after his African National Congress signed a last-minute coalition agreement with its long-time political rival, the Democratic Alliance, during the first sitting of the new session of Parliament. The ANC and the DA together hold a majority of seats in the 400-member Parliament to ensure Ramaphosa is re-elected. DD India's Isaac Lukando has more from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania.
It's a critical day for South Africa. The 400-member National Assembly is convening as we speak. On the agenda is the swearing in of those 400 members of that National Assembly. And from the swearing in, we will get a speaker and a deputy speaker. And from that exercise, a president-elect or president will be elected, and that president is expected to be Cyril Ramaphosa, getting another term in office. And this, of course, stems from negotiations that have been going on over the past couple of weeks since the 29th of May, when elections were held in South Africa. Now, there have been a number of parties that have been in talks with the ruling ANC, and it seems like the Democratic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, and the Patriotic Alliance have emerged on top. This is in relation to the 18 parties that are represented in the National Assembly. They are said to be going to form a government of national unity. But then from that have stemmed some criticisms from those other parties that have not been represented or are not said to be forming that government of national unity. They claim that they've been left out of negotiations. They haven't been given any framework on which to work or negotiate on to be part of that government of national unity. So from those political parties, we're hearing that most of them are saying that they have not only been left out, but this is not not a government of national unity, but a coalition between the ANC and primarily the Democratic Alliance, which is considered by many in the country to be business friendly. So this saga of getting South Africa a government, which is expected to take shape anytime from a week from now, is far from over. We expect more discussions and more discourse on this particular subject. But this will happen once Cyril Ramaphosa, hopefully if it is him, to be sworn in a week from now, and from there a cabinet to be formed. So all eyes still on South Africa, the largest economy in Africa. Isaac Lukando in Dar es Salaam, reporting for DD India.
Bulgaria's centre-right leader, GAB party leader Boyko Borisov on Thursday called for the formation of a cabinet of experts led by his party to run the country. The decision came after his party won 68 out of 240 seats in the 9th June parliamentary election. The GERB will need at least 2 coalition partners to form a government. The Movement for Rights and Freedom, or the MRF, won 47 seats, while the pro-Western bloc We Continue the Change, also known as PP, had 39 seats. New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon and Chinese Premier Li Qiang hailed bilateral ties and business connections on Friday. Earlier on Thursday, the two met in Wellington and signed bilateral agreements on trade and climate. During Li's trip, was the highest-level Chinese official to visit New Zealand in 7 years. New Zealand's Prime Minister said his government was focused on creating opportunities for exporters.
New Zealand-China business connections are active across a range of sectors. And notwithstanding this diverse picture, there's a common theme, and that is the complementarity of the bilateral trade relationship with our free trade agreement at its core. And this government is focused on creating even more opportunities for our exporters in order to facilitate even higher economic growth.
The US House of Representatives on Friday passed its version of the annual defense policy bill that includes divisive social issues such as abortion rights and treatment of transgender service members, which threaten to derail the must-pass legislation. The Senate Armed Services Committee will now work with the House to form a compromise version of the fiscal 2025 National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. This year's House version of the bill, an annual measure that sets policy for the Department of Defense, authorizes a record $895 billion in spending, which is a 1% increase over last year. An Indian Air Force aircraft on Friday carrying the mortal remains of the deceased in a Kuwait fire landed in New Delhi. Several leaders were present at the airport to receive the bodies. Earlier in the day, the mortal remains of 31 of the 45 Indians who died in the fire were handed over to their families at the Kochi airport in the southern Indian state of Kerala. An Indian Air Force aircraft had brought the bodies from Kuwait.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री के जो कोई डायरेक्शन थे, हम लोगों को हमारे एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स मिनिस्टर के द्वारा हम लोगों को मिला किए और हम लोग उसी के तहत काम किया किए। और वहाँ पे जो हमारे एम्बेसी के लोग हैं, हमारे आदरणीय एम्बेसडर साहब, वो भी बहुत तेज़ी से इसमें लगे रहे और हम लोग सारे वहाँ के मिनिस्टर्स से मिले और उनका हमारे कुवैत की सरकार का बहुत बड़ा कोऑपरेशन इसमें रहा है।
And a news just coming in from the G7 summit taking place in Italy. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has addressed the outreach session on artificial intelligence, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean at the G7 summit in Apulia, Italy on Friday. During the meeting, he congratulated the group on its 50th anniversary milestone. The Prime Minister expressed that it was a matter of great satisfaction for him to be attending the summit after his re-election in the largest democratic exercise of its kind in the history of humankind. He expressed that for technology to be successful, it had to be underpinned by a human-centric approach. In this context, he shared India's success in leveraging digital technology for public service delivery. Talking of India's AI mission premised on AI for all, the Prime Minister emphasized that this technology should be aimed at fostering progress and well-being of all. He underlined that with this broader objective, India was fostering international collaboration as a founding member of what is known as the Global Partnership for AI. The Prime Minister also elaborated on India's energy transition pathway, noting that its approach was based on availability, accessibility, affordability and acceptability. He mentioned that India was working towards achieving the target of net zero by the year 2070. Alluding to India's mission life or lifestyle for environment, he called upon the global community to join the tree plantation campaign launched by him on World Environment Day called Plant for Mother. The Prime Minister called for giving priority to the concerns of the Global South, in particular Africa. He recalled that it was a matter of honor for India that African Union was admitted as a permanent member of the G20 under India's presidency. All right, joining me on the phone line from Italy is my colleague Amrit Pal Singh. Amrit, why don't you put the Prime Minister's address in its proper context for our viewers?
Okay, in this session of the AI, Africa, Mediterranean and energy, the Prime Minister's intervention primarily focuses on how AI could be used for the benefit of the people. He said that for technology to be successful, it has to be underpinned by a human-centric approach. Therefore, calling for using technology to make people's lives better. He shared India's example and India's success in leveraging digital technology for public service delivery. In fact, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, also had in his intervention did praise Prime Minister for using AI during when India was the chair of G20, and also the DPI or digital public infrastructure for delivering the delivery of services to the last man in the queue or for last mile connectivity. Also, the Prime Minister spoke about India's AI mission, which is premised on AI for all. He said that this technology should be used for fostering progress and well-being of all, and not just a select few. And technology should not create a gap. However, instead it should be used for reducing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. He said that India was fostering an international collaboration as the founding member of GPAY, so therefore calling the world to use technology in ways that can better people's lives. He also touched upon India's energy transition pathway, saying that the approach was based on availability, accessibility, affordability and acceptability, and mentioned that India was working towards the net zero target by 2070. He spoke again, like he did at the last time at the G7 Hiroshima, about India's mission life or lifestyle for environment, and he called upon the global community to join the plantation campaign. So basically saying that to achieve climate change, you can take small steps for bigger results rather than taking adversarial approach and get stuck on how quarters of the world have been or how this issue has been approached till now. And lastly, he did talk about the global south, particularly giving priority to the concerns of the global south, and specifically mentioned Africa in it. He pointed out that how under India's presidency of the G20, AU or the African Union was admitted as a permanent member. Thus, India signaling that as India has given a push to the world, a push to the African continent, the world should focus and give priority to Africa and the global south in particular. Ramesh?
All right, Amrit, we'll leave it at that for now, but we'll keep coming back to you for more as we go along. In other news, the 18th edition of the Mumbai International Film Festival will begin in Mumbai on Saturday. The organizers received a record number of 1,018 films from 59 countries. India's Secretary of Information and Broadcasting, Sanjay Jaju, said that it is one of the biggest festivals in the world for documentary, films and animation. Shishir Shela reports from Mumbai.
A premier international event in the documentary film world, the Mumbai International Film Festival will take place from 15th to 21st June 2024 at the National Film Development Corporation campus in South Mumbai.
We are going to set the ball rolling for the Mumbai International Film Festival. This is arguably one of the biggest festivals in the world for documentaries, short films and now animation films as well.
The Mumbai International Film Festival is held once in 2 years since its inception in 1990. In this edition, the organizers received a record number of 1,018 films from 59 countries and across 61 languages. A total of 102 films have been selected by 3 selection committees comprising eminent film experts for the international and national competition sections, along with 16 films in MIF Prism. The 2024 edition will open with the screening of National Geographic's documentary Billy and Molly, an Otter Love Story. There will be 8 world premieres, international premieres, 17 Asia premieres and 15 India premieres during the film gala, where special packages have also been curated. A special country focus package will put spotlight on collaborations with 7 countries: Russia, Japan, Belarus, Italy, Iran, Vietnam and Mali.
Close to about 60 countries are participating through their films or through their engagements. Over the next week, you will have close to about 300 films, 314 films precisely, from 59 countries, 61 languages. We'll have 8 world premieres, 5 international premieres, 18 Asia premieres and 21 India premieres will all happen as part of the Mumbai International Film Festival.
The 18th MIF will host 20 masterclasses in conversations and panel discussions with industry luminaries such as filmmakers Santosh Sivan, Audrey Astonis, Ketan Mehta, Rishi Mehta and many more. In this edition, a doc film bazaar is being organized for the first time to help boost film production by providing a platform to filmmakers to find buyers, sponsors and collaborators for their projects. Besides these opportunities for selected projects, there will also be an open buyer-seller meet which will help filmmakers collaborate with buyers and corporates in the realm of production, syndication, acquisition, distribution and sales.
First time a film bazaar is also being organized. This provides a lot of opportunities to all the independent filmmakers who would not find market for their wares and products. So they will be able to come here to the festival, participate in dialogues, hold B2B conversations and effectively give themselves a platform through which they will be able to take their products up the value chain.
Mumbai International Film Festival provides a platform for documentary filmmakers from all over the world to meet, exchange ideas, explore the possibilities of co-productions and marketing of documentary, short and animation films, and also broaden the vision of filmmakers vis-a-vis world cinema. This unique blend of entertainment and education makes the Mumbai International Film Festival a must-attend event for anyone passionate about cinema. With its commitment to excellence, diversity and creative expression, the festival is sure to continue its legacy, showcasing the best of non-fiction films and celebrating the art of storytelling on the big screen. And now take a look at what else is making news in India.
The students who sat for a countrywide examination for admission into a course in medicine, accompanied by their parents, met India's Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan on Friday. The minister heard them and addressed their concerns. He assured them that no injustice would be done to the students. India's Health Minister J.P. Nadda chaired a high-level meeting on Friday on the objective of attaining targeted health goals in the first 100 days of the formation of India's new government. All right, time for a very short break. News and updates continue on the other side. Keep watching this extended edition of DD India News Hour. Don't go anywhere.